नमस्ते, नमो नमः। अहं स्वागतं करोमि अत्र भवतां। अद्य अस्माकं अन्ताराष्ट्रीय गीतायाः परिसंवादे। गीता सुगीता कर्तव्या किमन्यैः शास्त्रविस्तरैः या स्वयं पद्मनाभस्य मुखपद्माद् विनिसृता। वसुदेव सुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानंदं कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुम्। श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतायाः महायज्ञे अस्मिन् अद्य अस्माकं 14 दिवसः अस्ति। अद्य श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतायाः 14 अध्यायस्य वयं चिन्तनं मननं च करिष्यामः। 14 अध्यायः इत्युक्ते गुणत्रय विभाग योगः। गुणत्रय विभाग योगः अतीव सुप्रसिद्धः महत्वपूर्णश्च। गुणत्रयम् इति भगवता यत् प्रतिपादितं तत्र सत्त्वं गुणः, रजः गुणः, अपि च तमः गुणः। सत्त्वं रजः तम इति गुणाः प्रकृतिसम्भवाः निबध्नन्ति महाबाहो देहे देहिनमव्ययम्। तत्र सत्त्वं निर्मलत्वात् प्रकाशकमनामयं सुखसंगेन बध्नाति ज्ञानसंगेन च नघ। सर्वस्य अपि जन्तोः एते त्रयः गुणाः भवन्ति। सत्त्वं गुणः ज्ञाने संयोजयति, रजो गुणः कर्मणि व्यापारयति, अपि च तमः गुणः सर्वथा प्रमादालस्य निद्राभिस्तन्निबध्नाति भारत। भगवत् प्रोक्त प्रकारेण प्रमादे, आलस्ये अपि च निद्रायां तमः गुणः प्रत्येकं जन्तुं निबध्नाति। एतैः त्रिभिः गुणैः वयं सर्वथा परिचालिताः स्मः। एतेषां त्रयाणां गुणानां किं परिणामः, किं च स्वरूपं, कथं वा वयम् एतेषां त्रयाणां गुणानां पूर्णतः ऊर्ध्वं गन्तुं शक्नुमः। कैर्लिङ्गैः त्रीन् गुणान् एतान् अतीतो भवति प्रभो इत्यपि अर्जुनः पृष्टवान्। अतः अपि च तमोगुणः, एतेषां स्वरूपम्, एतेषां कार्यम्, एतेषां प्रकारः, अपि च एतेषां परस्परं प्रयोगः, अपि च प्रभावः भगवता सम्यक् उपवर्णितः अस्ति। अपि च त्रिभ्यः गुणेभ्यः ऊर्ध्वं कथं गच्छेत् तदपि वर्णितम्। अतः गुणातीत स्थितिं प्राप्तुं, त्रिगुणमुक्त स्थितिं प्राप्तुं कः उपायः तदपि भगवता प्रदर्शितः। अतः एषः अध्यायः अतीव महत्वपूर्णः अस्ति। अद्य एतस्य अध्यायस्य चिन्तनं, मननं, परिशीलनं, निधिध्यासनं, पर्यालोचनं च वयं सर्वे करिष्यामः। तदर्थम् अद्य महान्तः त्रयः विद्वांसः अस्माभिः सह एतस्मिन् आभासीय पटले विराजमानाः सन्ति। अहम् एतेषां सर्वेषां स्वागतं करोमि। अद्य एतस्य अध्यायस्य कुञ्चिका सम्भाषणं कर्तुं क्रोएशिया देशस्य श्रीमन्तः आड्रियन् गोस्जक् महोदयाः, श्रीमन्तः अजितानन्द दास महोदयाः अत्र उपस्थिताः सन्ति। तथैव अद्य अस्माकं माननीय वक्तृरूपेण महान्तः विद्वांसः पूज्याः स्वामिनः भक्ति राघव दास महोदयाः अत्र उपस्थिताः सन्ति। अद्य अस्माकम् एतस्य सत्रस्य सत्राध्यक्षरूपेण महान्तः संस्कृतज्ञः वैदिक गुणैः विभूषिताः अत्र श्रीमन्तः डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः पोलैंड देशतः अत्र उपस्थिताः सन्ति। अतः अहम् एतेषां महतां चरणारविन्दयोः भूयो भूयः प्रणाम पुरस्सरं भवतां स्वागतं व्याहरामि। एल्डी आर्ट्स महाविद्यालय पक्षतः अहं भवतां स्वागतं करोमि, अभिनन्दनं करोमि, अभिवादनं च करोमि, अपि च साधुवादं प्रयच्छामि यत् अस्माकम् एतस्मिन् श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतायाः महायज्ञे अद्य चतुर्दशे दिवसे अस्मान् सर्वान् अनुग्रहीतुम् अस्माकं ज्ञानं वर्धयितुं भवन्तः अत्र समागताः सन्ति इति अस्माकम् अतीव सौभाग्यं वर्तते। क्रोएशिया देशे समुत्पन्नाः श्रीमन्तः आड्रियन बोस्टक महोदयाः येषाम् आध्यात्मिकं नाम श्री अजितानंद दासः इति। ते तु वस्तुतः तत्र न्यायवादी रूपेण कार्यं कुर्वन्तः सन्ति, एडवोकेट। परन्तु यदा तेषां सम्बन्धः अंतरराष्ट्रीय कृष्ण भावनामृत संघेन सह अभवत् तदा तेषाम् उपरि तस्य संघस्य प्रभाव अभवत्। तेन प्रभावेण ते गीतायाः अध्ययनं कृतवन्तः, वैदिक शास्त्राणाम् अतीव सम्यक् अभ्यासं कृतवन्तः, स्वकीयं जीवनं वैदिक शास्त्रस्य अभ्यासार्थम् अपि च वैदिक शास्त्रस्य विकासार्थं तैः समर्पितम्। अनन्तरं पूज्यः अजितानंद दास महोदयाः भारतदेशं प्रति आगतवन्तः। तत्र मायापुर तीर्थस्थले ते दीर्घकालपर्यन्तं स्थित्वा विविधानां ग्रन्थानाम् अध्ययनं विधाय तत्र स्थलस्पर्शी ज्ञानं प्राप्य सम्प्रति अंतरराष्ट्रीय गुरुकुले मायापुरे ते तत्र निवसन्ति, अध्यापनं च कुर्वन्ति, अध्ययनं च कुर्वन्ति, बहूनां छात्राणां कृते मार्गदर्शनम् अपि कुर्वन्ति। सम्पूर्णं जीवनं वैदिकं वर्तते। तेषां हृदयं वैदिकं गीतामयं वर्तते, तेषां वाणी सुसंस्कृता वर्तते। मम सौभाग्यमासीत् वर्षद्वयपूर्वम् अहं यदा तान् मायापुर तीर्थस्थले दृष्टवान्, मिलितवान्, तदा मम उपरि तेषां महान् प्रभावः अभवत्। यद्यपि ते युवानः सन्ति, परन्तु अस्मिन् वयसि ते सम्पूर्णरूपेण संयमं गृहीत्वा ब्रह्मचारिणः भूत्वा पूर्णतया जीवनं त्याग तपस्या मयं कृतवन्तः। अतः एतादृशाः महर्षयः, ऋषिकल्पाः, त्यागिनः, संयमिनः श्रीमन्तः अजितानंद दास महोदयाः अस्माभिः सह अद्य विराजमानाः सन्ति। गुणत्रय विभाग योगस्य कुञ्चिका भाषणं कर्तुम् अहं तेषाम् आमन्त्रणं करोमि, तेषाम् अभिवादनं करोमि। अपि च अस्माकं सौभाग्यं यत् यद्यपि स्थितेषु अपि महत्सु कार्येषु ते अस्माकम् उपरि श्रद्धां विधाय कथंचित् समयम् उपकल्प्य सम्प्रति एतस्मिन् आभासीय पटले ते उपस्थिताः सन्ति। सर्वप्रथमं तेषां चरणकमलयोः वारं वारं प्रणाम परम्परां निवेदयामि। अपि च अहं प्रार्थयामि श्रीमन्तः ब्रह्मचारिणः अजितानंद प्रभु महोदयाः कृपया कुञ्चिका सम्भाषणं कृत्वा अस्मान् अनुगृह्णन्तु, अस्माकं ज्ञानं वर्धयन्तु इति अहं वारं वारं प्रार्थये श्रीमन्तः अजितानंद दास महोदयाः.
Thank you so much, dear and respected Professor Gajendra Panda. Like always, it is great pleasure to meet you. And it was our pleasure and honor to meet you here in Mayapur some years ago and witness your knowledge of Sanskrit and as well as your acquaintance with Vedic scriptures. And organization of such an event like Geeta Jayanti in 18 days is not showing only about your knowledge of Sanskrit, but also showing your character and being a well-wisher of all humanity, because by your preparation of this remarkable event, you're showing your character and trying to help humanity to overcome the Maya illusion of us being entrapped into worldly engagements. So thanking you so much for organizing, and also is my kind privilege and honor to have opportunity to speak and share some of the realizations from our Gurukula here in Sri Mayapur Dham, West Bengal. And it is also great privilege to be co-speaker with His Holiness Bhakti Raghav Swami, which I greet by this way, and Yogananda Shastri, whom I also greet by this way. I hope I will make a nice introduction, and then the scholars and devotees will be able to go deep into the topic. So I will try to speak on the Bhagavad Gita from the point of view of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Gaudiya Vaishnavism is especially focusing on presentation of relationship with the Supreme Lord, Sampanda Gyan. And from that aspect, I will try to see the Gita Upadesh, the teachings of Sri Krishna to Arjuna. So the Avishaya, or the topic itself, is the Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, or the three modes of material nature. As per the chapter itself, the adhikar or qualification of the student for such understanding is a muni. Krishna is saying that by this knowledge, munis or thinkers have already achieved great success. And the prayojana, the goal of the chapter is described in the last shloka, I believe. It's Aikantika Sukha, the ultimate happiness, which is above all the modes of material nature. The topic of gunas may not be so much popular because it is dealing with Prakriti, Prakrita Tattva, but in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is instructing Arjuna that he needs to learn both matter and spirit, material and spiritual knowledge. So it is also quite useful to understand how the living being is, a jiva is entrapped into modes of material nature and how to go out of them. So the Bhagavad Gita, as Gita Upanishad, is also having the fivefold division of subjects on Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Karma, and Kala. And this topic would be then about the Prakriti and Jiva, who is trying to transcend the modes of material nature. In the tradition of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is especially having Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Acharya, who have established the teachings of Vastutraya, threefold substance, and Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, we can say that the whole chapter can be seen in these three divisions. Samanda Gyan of Vastutraya being the knowledge of relationships, then Abhideya Gyan, the knowledge of process, which can be applied, and finally Prayojana Gyan, the goal of such a knowledge. And I have, according to teachings of Acharyas, tried to see the whole chapter in that way. So in the beginning of the chapter, we have Sambandha Gyan, where Krishna is glorifying the knowledge of the three modes of material nature. Gyan, it's sort of a Gyan Mahatmya, where he is saying that he will say the knowledge of knowledge, the highest knowledge, Gyanam Gyanam Uttamam. So it is quite elevated knowledge. And Krishna is also saying that result of being fixed in such knowledge will be that person will achieve the highest perfection, paransiddhim ito gataha. He's achieving the highest perfection. So we see how Krishna as a teacher is trying to encourage his friend and a student to understand that knowledge. And the second shloka as well is giving the benefit of someone who is being fixed or taking shelter of the knowledge of Upashritya. He will attain the transcendental nature like Krishna's, sadharmya, like Krishna's nature. Agataha, he will achieve it. And the result of such a establishment in the knowledge will be that person is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of annihilation. And then Krishna is, after this short Mahatmya, is explaining the relationship of Purusha and Prakriti, Purusha Prakriti Sambandha. Interestingly, Chaturdashi Adhyaya is in between, of course, 13 and 15 chapter. And in 13 chapter, Krishna have explained the Purusha and Prakriti, what is the nature of relationship of the Purusha and the Prakriti, the living being and material nature. And now further, he is in 14th chapter, he is explaining that relationship and helping Arjuna and the living being to overcome his, I would say, perverted relationship with material nature. And finally, in the 15th chapter, the Purushottama yoga is explaining the difference of the living being Jiva and the Ishvara in a complete sense, in that way, explaining what would be the supreme person and the supreme enjoyer. And very, very interesting teachings Krishna is explaining in verse 3 to 5, where he is saying, Mama yonir mahan brahma, tasmin garbham dadamyaham, that he have impregnated the material nature with living beings. Mama yonir, he is saying that he have impregnated this feminine principle, the material nature, with living beings. So Krishna is saying here that he is having the relation with a material nature, but we should not consider that Krishna as the supreme controller, Ishvara, is coming under the modes of material nature, and which he will explain, I believe, in text 5. So it is showing the example of Purusha Prakriti, masculine and feminine principles, where the feminine is the subordinate and dependent, and the Purusha being the independent and in a sense not covered by Prakriti. He's explaining the principle of Purusha. And in the next shloka, he's saying actually the similar thing, where declaring himself to be the father of all living beings. Bija, Pradakpita, or the seed-giving father. In religious traditions, the god is many times considered as a father. So here we have also trace of such a theological statement. Another interesting thing that he's saying, Murtaya Sambhavanti Yaha, that Murtaya, the forms of living beings in this world, Sambhavanti, or appear. So if he is the seed-giving father, then the living beings must be like him, like a father, like a son. So the living beings of this world, in essence, have the form like the supreme controller, Ishvara, but we should not consider then that God is just anthropomorphic and that he is like an ordinary human being. Then he's saying the difference between him and the living being in the text 5, where he is declaring that that material nature, Prakriti, is consisting of three modes. That is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamaguna, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And he is also saying that when the living being comes in contact with nature, then that living being becomes conditioned by these modes. So he is declaring that living being becomes conditioned by, he have explained that he have impregnated material nature, but he is not conditioned by these three modes, which is showing that, or indicating that in the 15th chapter, he will declare himself as a Purushottama, or the supreme person, supreme enjoyer. The Purushottama is not like ordinary Purusha, because him being fully satisfied within himself, Atmarama, he is not going in relationships to enjoy to enjoy others, but to expand his happiness and pleasure by seeing others happy and satisfied. So Prakriti Purusha, materialistic enjoyers of this world, being dissatisfied by themselves, are engaged in sense enjoyment, and therefore, because of their desire, they're becoming covered by modes of material nature. So that's a big difference, that he himself is not entering into relationship to enjoy others, but to share his enjoyment. And in the scriptures of Srila Rupa Goswami, he is described as Rasamai, the embodiment of all relationships, the one who is a rasa himself. He's sharing the rasa with others. So in that way, Krishna is declaring that he is different from ordinary living being. Furthermore, explaining in text 6 to 8 the origination and the condition of the modes, and how living being becomes conditioned by different kinds of modes. He's declaring that Sattva Guna is Nirmalatvat, purest, being the purest in material world, purer than Rajas and Tamas, and is free from sinful reactions. It's also illuminating, prakashakam, and all of us have experienced when we have some of goodness in our life, that it is illuminating and it is a big stepstone towards spiritual life. Therefore, it's recommended for all human beings to come to the level of Sattva Guna. It is also free from sinful reactions, which are just contaminating the consciousness of living being. And he's also declaring the condition, the bandha, by which living being is entrapped in this world, and that is Sukha Sangha and Jnana Sangha. So those living beings with want to interact with mode of goodness, they are associating with Sukha, the happiness, and Jnana, the knowledge. Further in text 7, he's declaring that the Rajaguna is born of Trishna Sangha, unlimited desires and longings, and that living being is conditioned by Karma Sangha. It is bandha or conditioned by Karma Sangha, desiring fruitive results. Persons are performing their duties either within Varnashram or out Varnashram, and trying to enjoy fruitive results, the palam of their actions. And the last one, the Tamoguna, it is born of ignorance, Agyanaja, and living being is conditioned by madness, Pramada, Alasya, the indolence, Nidra, sleep, and one more. Yeah, Nidra is just a sleep. So people who are in mode of goodness are exhibiting such symptoms, they are conditioned in that way, and it's not very much appreciated. And the living being should try to overcome definitely the lower mode of ignorance as well as mode of passion. Next, in verse 10, shortly, Krishna is explaining that there is competition between the modes of material nature, abhibhuya. They are sometimes predominating each other in that way. Sometimes in the sattva guna is predominating, sometimes rajaguna, and sometimes tamoguna. And so we can say from that no one is steady in this world in any of these modes. So we should not also in one way judge someone if he is in lower modes, because sooner or later we can also be in the same situation. In verses 11 to 13, he's explaining the manifestation of symptoms of persons being in different, under the different gunas, upajaya, and in that way he's saying that yes, that the mode of goodness is experienced when all the gates are illuminated by knowledge. Sarvadvareshu dehesmin prakasha upajaya. The prakasha, they are illuminated. The living beings' senses are purified by performing austerities and sacrifices, and person can act properly in that environment. Then in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, the lobha, greed, prakriti, the attachment, the fruitive activities, great endeavor, aramba, are exhibited. So we can see, especially in the cities, the people are very much in the rush for the fruitive results. And in the tamoguna, when there is increase of mode of ignorance, there is opposite of sattva guna. Instead of prakasha, we have aprakasha, apravriti, and pramada. There is a darkness, there is no illumination, there is inertia instead of activity, pramada, the madness, and moha, the illusion. In the verses 14 and 15, Krishna is explaining Pratipadia, it is attainment or destination of a person who is in different mode. So everyone knows that after the life he needs to go into some state of existence. So Krishna is explaining here what is the destination of different beings. So if someone leaves body in the mode of goodness, he attains the purer higher planets of great sages. The one in the mode of passion takes birth amongst those engaged in fruitive activities, karma kandis. And if one dies in ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom, or in Sanskrit, Muda Yonishu, which would means that these living beings are not so enlightened. In contrast would be Buddha Yonishu, or the enlightened living beings. He's also saying that the results of the actions, palam, in goodness, the result will be pure and it will be satisfactory for a performer in the mode of passion. It will be misery. In the ignorance, result is just foolishness. So we should be very much aware how we are acting, especially be aware of foolishness and misery, the Rajaguna and Tamoguna. Then in the chapter 17, he's saying what develops from different kind of modes, sanjayati. Saying that from sattva is coming jnanam, sattva sanjayate jnanam. Rajasoloba, from passion is coming greed, because the more we have developed some results in life, we become more greedy. If our last karma is satisfied, then that will create more greed or loba. And if our lust is not satisfied, that will create krodha, or the anger. And tamoguna is creating just pramada, moha, and tamas. Then in text 18, Krishna is also kind of repeating what is destination or the movements, directions of living being as per his predominant mode. Therefore, he is saying basically through two directions and one stationary position. Udvam gachanti sattvasta. Those who are in sattvasta, they are udva gachanti. They are going upward to the higher planets. Madhye tishtanti rajasaha. Those who are in the Rajaguna, they are staying in the Madhya, means the earthly planets. Burloka tishtanti, staying. And Adho gachanti tamasaha. Those who are in the mode of tamas, they are going into lower directions, or literally hellish planets, Naraka, Loka. Then in that way, the relationship and directions of living being with modes is described till the verse 18, and then the Abhideya Gyan, the knowledge of the process of transcending the modes, is there in the verses 19, in 20 and further. So 19 and 20 is speaking about the transcendental vision, which is the process of transcending modes of material nature. And Krishna is also explaining the vision of someone who is about to transcend the modes, the drashta. In the traditional philosophy of Bharata, we have drashta, drishti, and drishya. Drashta, the seer; drishti, the seeing and drishya, the seen. In other words, the subject object and the interaction of subject and the object. So the psychology, Krishna is explaining the psychology that seeing the modes of material nature doing everything, our relationship, or better to say relation with material nature is being transcendent. And Krishna is saying also very interesting thing, that when someone is having such vision, he's achieving his nature, madbhavam. Also indicating that Krishna or the absolute truth also have bhava or his own nature. In the Natya Shastra, the different kinds of bhavas are explained. And we have Prakriti bhava, materialistic bhava, or the existence, and aprakrita bhava, transcendental nature. So Krishna is saying here madbhavam, which would be definitely not prakrita bhava, it will be aprakrita bhava, transcendental nature. Krishna is confirming his nature of Purushottama, supreme nature. Krishna is also saying in the text 20 the benefit of transcending the modes. Similarly, like Sri Upanishad is saying that living being will enjoy the immortality or the nectar. Vimukto mritama ashnate. The one who is liberated from these three modes, he is enjoying ashnate the amritam. Mritam being the mortality, and immortality being the amritam being the nectar of immortality. So Krishna is advising us actually that we should have some higher pleasure in our life, higher pleasure than the three modes of material nature which we have explained earlier. Krishna, Arjuna, further being very inquisitive, he's asking the Gunatita Linga. He's asking about the what are the symptoms of person transcendental Guna Atita to the three modes of material nature, and what is he doing to transcend, and what is his achara behavior. Kairlingai stringuna in etan adito bhavati prabho. What are his symptoms? Kairlingais, kim acharaha, how he behaves and how he acts, and katam, being the how he transcends. Katam chaitam stringunan ativartate, transcending the modes. So Krishna is continuing to answer that by describing different symptoms of such a being in text 22 to 25. And I will just enumerate few because we are also depending on time. Some of those are that he is prakasha, prakasha pravritti moha na kankshati, that he doesn't hate, na dveshti na kankshati, doesn't hate or desire to be in any of these states of this mode. Prakasha being in this mode of goodness, pravritti, as he explained, being in the rajaguna, and moham evacha, or also being under illusion. He doesn't hate that situation or doesn't desire that situation. Krishna very interestingly saying. also remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active, situated in a self-regards like happiness and stress, and looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye. Is a great wisdom if you want to become detached from this world. We see how Krishna is not just advocating renunciation, but advocating also detachment, not to be attached, to be renounced. He's also saying that the earth stone or a piece of gold. Usually the persons who are renounced, they can be also very much attached to that renunciation and be aloof from the gold. But Krishna is saying here that also you should be aloof from the stones, not only from the gold, because the person who is properly situated in transcendental mode, he will be able to use either lump of earth, stone, or a gold in Krishna's service. In that way, he's also detached and not only renounced. That would be yukta vairagya. And being described, these symptoms, the lingas, qualities, Krishna is saying what would be the method of transcending the modes. And interestingly, he's saying avya-vichari bhakti yoga. Is this saying that devotional service without fail. Vyabhichari means vyabhicharati, something like emerges like a wave. Sometimes is up and sometimes is down, just like vyabhichari bhavas. They are emerging from person who is experiencing them, just like a mother thinking of a child going out to the school, and suddenly she thinks, oh, how will my child be in school? Will he have a meal? Will he be injured? How will he behave with different students and a teacher? Mother being worried like that. So different kinds of emotions are there. But Krishna here is saying avya-vichari, not vya-vichari. Avya-vichari would then be steady, sthai bhava. So that without fail, Krishna is indicating that this person must come to the level of bhava bhakti. He must come to the level of serving with transcendental emotions. So only such a person will transcend the modes of material nature. And Krishna is saying here very interestingly that in that way, the bhakti yoga or bhakti itself is above the modes of material nature and is continuing after someone is established in the platform of Brahma Bhuta. So Krishna is glorifying the process of Bhakti Yoga in the verse 26, and in verse 27 finally he concludes with Prayojana Gyan, the knowledge of the goal of all this chapter, where he first of all establishes himself as the Pratishta, he being the Pratishtaka, the let's call it the founder of the impersonal Brahman, being the basis of the personal Brahman. Pratishtaham, Brahmano hi pratishtaham, I being the basis of the impersonal Brahman. He's also indicating what will be spoken in the next chapter, explaining him as the Purushottama, the higher than the Brahman aspect of absolute truth. And he continues explaining the nature of that absolute truth, calling it Amrita, the immortal or nectarian, Avyaya, imperishable, Shashvata, eternal, Sukha, and being the happiness, and Aikantika, the ultimate. Sukasya aikantikasya, being the ultimate goal of practice of the bhakti yoga and transcending the modes of material nature, guna traya vibhaga yoga. So beautifully Krishna have explained what is the goal of such a practice, such a process of devotional service. So in that way, the complete knowledge of Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga have been enunciated by Sri Krishna, and by the mercy and the help of Vaishnavacharyas in Sri Bhagavad Sampradaya, I have tried also to explain the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, and I hope I have been able to explain it very nicely and try to inspire our listeners and viewers to become established in the Brahmabhuta level by the process of Bhakti Yoga, and glorify also the conversation of Krishna with Arjuna. I have tried to explain small Upadesha, Gita Upadesha, where Sri Krishna is explicitly instructing Arjuna to transcend the modes of material nature. Why? So that he can become steady, Brahmabhuta, and perform his duty of being a warrior, Kshatriya, for the love of Sri Krishna. So that in the teachings of Acharyas would be the purpose of explaining the Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. With these words, I would like to thank all of our listeners, and would request Professor Gajendra Panda if he can kindly take the word and continue. Thank you so much again, and Shri Krishna Bhagavan ki jai.
धन्यवादाः नमस्ते भवन्तः स्वयं सत्त्वगुणभूयिष्ठाः सन्ति अतः पूज्याः अजितानन्ददास ब्रह्मचारी महोदयाः अत्र अस्माभिः सह विराजन्ते अपि च भवद्भिः प्रतिपादितं गुणत्रयम् अतीव सरलं शास्त्रीयं बोधगम्यं अपि च बालबोधम् आसीत् भवद्भिः प्रतिपादितं सुखसंगेन बध्नाति ज्ञानसंगेन सा नघ यः सत्त्वगुणभूयिष्ठः भवति सः सुखी अपि भवति अपि च सर्वदा ज्ञानेन सह अनुरक्तः भवति अत्र ये त्रयः गुणाः सन्ति तेषां सर्वेषामपि गुणानां अस्माकम् उपरि प्रभावस्तु अस्ति एव कदाचित् काले भवति अपि च अन्यत् गुणद्वयं दमयति रजस्तमश्चाभिभूय सत्त्वं भवति भारत रजस्तत्त्वं तमश्चैव तमस्तत्त्वं रजस्तथा इति अनेन प्रकारेण भगवता सम्यक् प्रतिपादितम् अतः सत्त्वगुणस्य प्राप्त्यर्थं वयं प्रयत्नं कुर्मः रजोगुणः पूर्णतया दमयितुं न शक्यते परन्तु तस्य कृषीकरणं कर्तुं शक्यते तथैव तमोगुणः एतेषां त्रयाणां गुणानां चिन्तनं मननं भवद्भिः स्वकीय शोधपत्रे कृतम् उत्तमरूपेण कृतम् अतः वयम् आनन्दम् अनुभवामः त्रयाणां गुणानां वर्णनं विधाय अन्ते भगवान् कथयति एतेभ्यः भवति सः गुणातीतः उच्यते मानापमानयोः तुल्यः तुल्यमित्रादिपक्षयोः सर्वारम्भ परित्यागी गुणातीतः स उच्यते अतः सः अर्जुनं प्रति उपादिशत् यत् एतेभ्यः त्रिभ्यः अपि गुणेभ्यः ऊर्ध्वं गत्वा ऊर्ध्वं गत्वा कथंचित् गुणातीतस्थितिं प्राप्तुं प्रयत्नं कुरु इति भगवतः उपदेशः विद्यते। पूज्यः अजितानंद ब्रह्मचारी महोदयः अस्माभिः सह अत्र आभासीय पटले विराजमानः भूत्वा अतीव सदयम् अस्मभ्यम् एतत् दिव्यं ज्ञानं दत्तवन्तः इति एल्डीआर कॉलेज परिवार पक्षतः अहं भवतां कृते नमः पुष्पाञ्जलिं निवेदयामि, भवतां चरणकमलयोः प्रणामान् निवेदयामि। भवताम् उपकारं वयं सर्वथा स्मरिष्यामः। यद्यपि भवन्तः बहुकार्यव्यग्रः भवन्ति, भवदीयं जीवनं वैदिककर्ममयं वर्तते, अपि च मायापुर गुरुकुले भवन्तः तत्र शास्त्रान् पाठयन्ति, बहुषु कार्येषु सत्त्वयुक्त कार्येषु सर्वदा रताः भवन्ति, परन्तु अस्माकम् आभासीय पटले एतस्मिन् कार्यक्रमे कथंचित् श्रद्धां निधाय गुणत्रय विभाग योगस्य उपरि उत्तमरूपेण भवतां प्रवचनम् अभवत् इति एल्डीआर कॉलेज परिवार पक्षतः अहं भूयो भूयः धन्यवाद वचनानि आविष्करोमि, साधुवादं च प्रयच्छामि। नमस्ते, नमो नमः पूज्याः अजितानंद ब्रह्मचारी महोदय। अद्य अस्माकं माननीय वक्तृरूपेण परम पूज्याः अत्र श्रीमन्तः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयाः उपस्थिताः सन्ति। प्रथमम् अहं तेषां चरणकमलेषु मदीय प्रणामान् निवेदयामि। तेषां परिचयं किं वा ददामि, ते तु पूज्यः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयाः भगवतः विभूतिकल्पाः सन्ति। एतेषां जन्म कनाडा देशे ब्रिटिश कोलंबिया प्रान्ते अभवत्। उच्च शिक्षणं तत्रैव प्राप्तं, परन्तु अनन्तरं यदा पूज्य अभयचरणारविन्द श्रील प्रभुपादस्य दर्शनम् अभवत्, तेभ्यः दीक्षां गृहीत्वा एतैः वैदिकं जीवनं प्रारब्धम्। अनन्तरं भारतं प्रति प्रत्यासमागत्य एतैः वेदाः, वेदान्तादिकं, गीता शास्त्रम्, अन्यानि बहूनि शास्त्राणि विधिवत् गुरुभ्यः पठितानि। सम्प्रति सह्याद्रि गुरुकुलस्य सञ्चालनम् एते कुर्वन्ति। बहूनां जनानां कृते वैदिक ज्ञानं, वैदिकं जीवनम् अपि च गीतायाः सन्देशं प्रयच्छन्ति। पूज्य स्वामिनां जीवनं पूर्णतया वैदिकं वर्तते, ज्ञानमयं तपः वर्तते। अतएव एते तपस्विनः सन्ति, महन्तः विद्वांसः अपि सन्ति। विविधेषु शास्त्रेषु दीर्घकालपर्यन्तं गभीरं चिन्तनं यद्यपि बहुकार्यव्यग्रः भवन्ति, एतैः सह वार्तालापकरणमपि महते कष्टाय भवति, परन्तु तथापि अहम् अतीव आनन्दम् अनुभवामि यत् पूज्याः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयाः अस्माभिः सह एतस्मिन् कार्यक्रमे आभासीय पटले विराजमानः सन्ति। अस्मभ्यम् एते गुणत्रय विभाग योगस्य उपरि सविशेषं ज्ञानं प्रदास्यन्ति। पूज्याः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयानां वचनम् अतीव सुललितं भवति, उपदेशः अतीव सारयुक्तः भवति, बहूनां जनानां कृते प्रेरकः भवति। अतः अद्य अस्माकं सौभाग्यम् एल्डीआर कॉलेज पक्षतः अहं भवताम् अभिनन्दनं करोमि, अभिवादनं करोमि। भवतां सौभाग्यं यत् भवद्भ्यः वयं ज्ञानं प्राप्स्यामः, प्रेरणां प्राप्स्यामः, अपि च अतीव आनंदपूर्वकं भवतां वचनं श्रोष्यामः। अहम् अधिकं तेषां परिचयं न ददामि। आगच्छन्तु, वयम् एतेषां चरणारविन्दयोः पूर्णतया समर्पितः भूत्वा वयम् एतेषां मार्गदर्शनं प्राप्स्यामः। गुणत्रय विभाग योगस्य उपरि भगवता कृष्णेन किम् उक्तं, भगवतः कृष्णस्य हृदये के विचाराः समुत्पन्नाः आसन् इति भगवतः कृष्णस्य हार्दान् भावान् अधिगन्तुं वयं प्रयत्नं करिष्यामः। अहं निवेदयामि आचार्यान् स्वामिनः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयान् यत् भवन्तः अस्मभ्यं गुणत्रय विभाग योगस्य उपरि प्रवचनं कृत्वा अस्माकम् उत्साहः आनन्दं च वर्धयन्तु, अपि च कृपां कुर्वन्तु, अस्मान् अनुगृह्णन्तु इति अहं प्रार्थये। परमपूज्याः स्वामिनः भक्ति राघव महोदयाः।
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Takshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Chatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Sri Prabhupada Ki. It is my great pleasure and my great fortune also to be part of this. I would describe it as a monumental event organized by the team assisting our Dr. Gajendra Panda, for which I thank him immensely. It is most befitting to end what we have all experienced in the year 2021 as a very turbulent year. And what better way to end the year and to begin a new year than to be hearing from such a transcendental literature as Bhagavad Gita. Being from outside the Vedic culture, being born in Canada, it took me in this lifetime 25 years before even hearing the name Krishna. When I first came in contact with the Bhagavad Gita, that is all, of course, by the mercy of my Guru Maharaj, the divine grace of Prabhupada. And Bhagavad Gita continues, not only for myself, but for so many others who have come in contact with these teachings, especially outside of India, as a guiding light. And we have come to know as well how Bhagavad Gita is the treasure house of knowledge that goes beyond all boundaries, that goes beyond all faiths, all religions for that matter. It is the book of knowledge, the preliminary book of knowledge for all persons in the material world, especially those in leadership position. So I'm very thankful to get this opportunity. I was very happy to hear the presentation given by His Grace Ajitananda Prabhu on the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Many of the points that he has made, I had also naturally noted down, so I will avoid to repeat, although it will be difficult. So with your kind permission, what I have done is I have divided this chapter in various sections, and I've chosen a few key verses that I would like to comment upon. And by the end of my presentation, I would like to link or connect some of these important teachings of this 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, entitled The Three Modes of Material Nature, to various aspects that I'll elaborate upon a little bit later in my presentation. I would like to recite a few of these verses with your kind permission in Sanskrit, and then provide some short comments to see how we can derive some inspiration from these important teachings of Lord Krishna. The chapter, as we have heard, covers 27 verses, out of which Lord Krishna speaks 26. Arjuna is only asking one question at the very end of the chapter. We will come to that later on. So I will begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim. Yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. So chapter 14 begins with the first verse. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Param Bhuya Pravakshyami Jnanam Jnanamuttamam Yajgyadva Munaya Sarve Param Siddhim Itogataha. Although we know that in previous chapters, Lord Krishna has spoken about Jnanam, knowledge. We can recall in the 9th chapter, especially, Krishna in the 2nd verse of the 9th chapter speaks to Arjuna how this knowledge that he is explaining or giving to him, it is Rajavidya. Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, most confidential knowledge. Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pavitram, Idam, Uttamam, topmost knowledge. However, we see how this topmost knowledge, Krishna continues to expand upon this knowledge. Jnananam, Jnanam, Uttamam. The most sublime knowledge is being referred to here. And Krishna also explains how by knowing this knowledge, by cultivating this knowledge, great sages in the past who have cultivated this same knowledge have attained this Param Siddhim. What is this Param Siddhim? This will be explained, of course, later on in the chapter. Therefore, the translation, again, I shall declare to you, O Arjuna, this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained, the supreme perfection. Second verse is also equally important. Idam jnanam upasritya mama sadharmyamagataha sargepi nupajayante pralayena vyatanti cha. Krishna is explaining here to Arjuna that by becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can actually attain the same transcendental position. He is not telling that one becomes exactly like me, or that one becomes myself. He is explaining that one attains the transcendental position. Krishna is described in the Shastra. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So these three qualities of Sachit Ananda, Sat, eternal, Chit, full of knowledge, Ananda, full of happiness, is also something that the living entity can again regain or realize. And this, of course, is the message of this 14th chapter, as was nicely explained by our previous speaker, Ajitananda Prabhu. Actually, the majority of the verses in this chapter explain the various symptoms of those who are in the modes of goodness. And we can easily, simply by reading those verses, we can easily understand that none of those positions, whether I am in Sattagun or Tamagun or Rajagun, regardless of which modes of material nature, I am still conditioned. That even I may be situated in the mode of goodness, I can be overcome by the influence of the lower modes of nature. Of course, Krishna also explains that of all of these three modes, naturally, the mode of goodness, and this is in text number 6, which I will just read here as well. Tatra sattvam nirmaladvat prakashakam manamayam sukha sangena vadnati jnana sangena chanaga. That mode of goodness, because it is purer than the other modes, is illuminating and frees one, very important, is both illuminating and frees one from sinful reactions. The other two modes of material nature don't produce that effect, rather the opposite. Sinful activities increase when one is in the mode of passion and when one is in the mode of ignorance. Therefore, the whole Vedic culture, the whole system of varna and ashrama, the whole purpose of dharma. Krishna descends in the material world to teach us about dharma. And there are two levels of dharma. Here we are dealing actually in this chapter, we're dealing with these two levels of dharma as well. One is the material dharma. Material dharma, whereby being here in the material world, we are conditioned by these modes. It is inevitable. This is stated also in this chapter, that all living entities, I impregnate this mahatattva, this material world, with living entities who, by coming in contact with the Prakriti, material nature, become conditioned by these modes of material nature. And this chapter actually deals with practically all of the five tattvas. Also, as mentioned earlier, Bhagavad Gita is giving us a very wonderful, very simple, but very clear understanding of tattva, beginning with Ishvara. And of course, these are further elaborated in other sections of the Bhagavad Gita, and then further, even beyond, in such literatures as the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavat Purana. We are therefore, by hearing the description of these different modes of nature, naturally our goal should be to become situated in the mode of goodness, because the mode of goodness, it is illuminating, it is freeing one from all sinful reactions, and one can develop knowledge. One can develop knowledge. One can develop peace of mind. This I will refer to a little later, some very striking, most important verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam that also deal with the modes of material nature and how there is a specific process which is naturally linked with the same instruction Lord Krishna is giving here in terms of bhakti or devotion. And in the science of devotion, especially in the Guru Parampara, in our Vaishnava Guru Parampara, our foremost of acharyas who have been deputed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago have very wonderfully, very elaborately, in great detail, given us this science of devotion or science of bhakti, which is in many ways hidden in various Vedic literatures, but especially prominently displayed in the pages of the Bhagavatam, and which is, of course, the main message of the entire Bhagavad Gita and the main message of this chapter as well. So therefore, we'll just continue on with a few verses. Another benefit of becoming situated and remaining situated in the mode of goodness is mentioned in text number 11. Sarva dvadeshu dehesmin prakasha upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyad vivridham sattvam ityuta. The manifestations of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. Actually, those who rise to the mode of goodness, those who maintain themselves in the mode of goodness, it will be manifest in the bodily symptoms themselves. The body is described as we are all living in what the Bhagavatam describes as the city of 9 gates. 9 gates or 9 holes within the body, and those who are actually living by the cultivation of knowledge in the mode of goodness, then these 9 gates of the body become, we could say, illuminated. Yes. And This is summarize some of the benefits again in the 16th verse of this chapter, where Krishna explains what happens when we are acting in the mode of goodness. Karmana sukritasyahu satvikam nirmalam phalam rajasastu phalam dukkham agyanam tamasa phalam. By acting in the mode of goodness, one becomes purified. Work done in the mode of passion results in distress, and actions performed in the mode of ignorance result in foolishness. So this was also nicely brought out by our Achitananda Prabhu, how the very wonderfully explained, actually, especially in our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, what is referred to as Sambandha, Abhidaya, and Prayojana Gyan. This is being nicely presented actually in the pages of this 14th chapter. And all of the various symptoms, actually from verse 9 to 18, basically Lord Krishna is describing, elaborating in great detail what is the influence and what are the effects of these modes of material nature. One of those, yes. So without going into great detail, I would like to take us to verse number 19, which, yes, what will be, verse 19 and 20 in particular are very nicely explaining what will be the effect or the result for those who are able to come to this platform of the mode of goodness. Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yada drasta nupashyati gudebhyascha param vetti madbhavam sodigaschati. Krishna is speaking, when you see that there is nothing beyond these modes of nature in all activities, and that the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all these modes, then you can know my spiritual nature. So by the Krishna throughout the Bhagavad Gita, of course, is giving higher and higher, more and more confidential knowledge to Arjuna. And in this verse, explaining that as long as we remain conditioned or entangled by these modes of material nature, we cannot attain this higher nature, which is actually our original nature. Our original nature is very much the same as Krishna, as we mentioned a little earlier. And verse 20 is very much continuing this same message that Lord Krishna is giving. Guna netan atityatrin dehi deha samudbhavam janma mritu jara dukkair vimukto mritam ashnute. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. Very important instruction, of course, what are the results or the benefits for those who are cultivating the mode of goodness. And of course, in other words, the message, the whole Vedic culture is encouraging us, helping us in so many different ways to gradually rise from the lower modes of nature and to at least become situated in the mode of goodness. But then the last instructions in this chapter, as given by Lord Krishna, is that one needs to go even beyond the mode of goodness. And this is, of course, the very well-known and famous verse, text number 26. Mam tayo vyabicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samitityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall in any circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Actually, it is important to make a link or a connection. Bhagavad Gita, as we know, is described by our acharyas as the ABC, or the preliminary knowledge of transcendental knowledge. And other literatures, especially like the Srimad Bhagavatam, are further elaborating on the same topic. There are a series of verses that I would like to share in this connection, which are directly connected with these modes of material nature. These particular 5 verses, we will see immediately the connection here in this 14th chapter, were especially quoted by Srila Prabhupada in going to the Western countries. Actually, Vedic culture, automatically, those who are fortunate to be born in India, because it is also described in the various Vedic literatures that one who is fortunate to take birth in the land of Bharatvarsha, then he has the greatest opportunity. This was nicely shared actually by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Bharat bhumite hoila manusya janamazar janma saltak kori kora para upakar. And therefore, when Srila Prabhupada went to the Western countries, he understood that he's going to a place where Vedic culture is practically non-existent. And therefore, he chose 5 very special verses, again, that are connected with these modes of material nature, and that I would like to share with you. There's a few other connections I'd like to make in the remaining portion of this presentation, and I'll just outline them very briefly here. And one of them has to do with the whole philosophy or concept of Varnashrama Dharma, and how these modes of material nature are connected with the concept of Varnashrama Dharma. And a few other points I'll mention in a few minutes. The series of verses are very profound in their meaning, and they are taken from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter number 2, which is entitled Divinity and Divine Service. Dharma means actually that we have two natures. Again, in this chapter, Krishna speaks about Deha and Dehi. Deha is this material body, this material tabernacle that we have. But within this body is the Dehi. And of course, this is going back to one of the very first instructions given by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Dehi nosmin yata dehi komaram jovanam jara tata dehantaras dhiras tatra namuyati. A very fundamental instruction and very fundamental knowledge, which is of absolute necessity for us to become successful in dealing with the world in which we are living. So in this second canto, this is text number 17, which is well known by those who are familiar with the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Sravana Kirtana Rijantasto Yabhadrani Vidunoti Surit Satam. And I read the translation. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Of course, the whole Bhagavad Gita, in the Western countries, we know the Bhagavad Gita as the song of the Lord. And simply by hearing this message of the Bhagavad Gita, which should be heard on a regular basis, on a daily basis, this is the effect that will happen. The impurities within the heart and the influences of these modes of material nature will become cleansed. And as we become more and more purified, we will rise above these modes of material nature. And therefore, this second of 5 texts that I'm sharing with the audience here, most important. We recite this verse actually every day. This was taught to us by our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. Nasta prayesha badrishu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Translation: by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, or by regularly hearing the message of the Bhagavatam, the message of the Bhagavad Gita, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So this verse 18, directly connected with the previous verse we have read, whereby when we make, whole Vedic culture is facilitating, encouraging, assisting in so many ways. It is part of the culture, an integral part of the culture, that on a daily basis we hear something from Shastra, whether it is Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, for this very purpose. The whole of Bhagavad Gita is the transcendental sound vibration of Lord Krishna, giving us transcendental knowledge. We come to text number 19, which is directly connected with our 14th chapter here, very nicely explaining what happens. Tada rajastamo bhava kama lobha dayaschaye Cheta etairana bridam stitam sattve prasidati. Translation: as soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness and he becomes completely happy. As we read these particular verses, very similar to the Bhagavad Gita, it is very logical. It is very scientific as well. That simply by following this process, we will get the results which are being described here. Now I come to the fourth verse. These 5 verses are like jewels in themselves in terms of the teachings that they are giving us in the context of these modes of material nature. So if we do this, if we hear on a daily basis the messages Katha Krishna in relation to Krishna, in relation to devotion, devotional service, bhakti, then we come to this level as we rise above these modes of material nature. Evam prasana manaso bhagavat bhakti jogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. Thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness. There is goodness, but there is something above goodness, which is called pure goodness, Suddha Sattva, or unalloyed goodness. So the translation, thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead and the stage of liberation from all material association. These modes of material nature are binding us, are heavily binding us to all kinds of material association. But we, who are the spirit soul within this material body, have actually nothing to do with this material existence. Our nature is different. Our nature is of the level of transcendence. And the last instruction, or the last verse, which is text number 21, what is the end result? By following this process, Vidyate hridaya grantish chidyante sarva samshayah kriyante chasya karmani drista evat manishvare. Something very important. Translation: thus the knot in the heart is pierced and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Self as master means up until the point that we are under the modes of material nature, Shastra describes our situation as Godasa, servant of the senses. We have a choice either to remain Godas, for which we simply continue further and further our entanglement in the material world, or we can become master of the senses, master of our mind, by becoming Goswami, from Godasa to Goswami. I just wanted to make this connection with the Bhagavatam, because the Bhagavatam actually contains all of the important instructions that are there, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to make a few other connections here. And one is with a very interesting essay that was written by our founder Acharya's Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada many years ago, before going to the Western countries, called Geeta Nagari. Geeta Nagari. That place where the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are not only spoken, but where the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are lived. And in that essay, which appeared actually in 1956, in Srila Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazine, he describes how in our Geeta Nagari, the main personality, actually, who will be worshipped by all the residents of Geeta Nagari, will be Parthasarathi, naturally. The Supreme Lord, who is the, who has taken the very humble position of being the chariot driver of Arjuna. One of our temples in India, of course, in Delhi, we have the deity of Sri Radha Parthasarathi. So, in other words, whole Vedic culture is facilitating that in a more simplified atmosphere of village life. Geeta Nagari actually means especially a village where people are having that understanding that the primary goal of life is to develop or cultivate this knowledge, as was mentioned a little earlier. That the great sages in the beginning of this chapter, all the great sages, by cultivating this knowledge, have attained this param siddhim, the supreme perfection. So therefore, we should understand by this, simply by observing. It is very easy to observe all over the world, the vast majority of people. This was Srila Prabhupada's observation in going to New York City. I'm not singling out any particular city, but it just so happened to be where Srila Prabhupada went. And he was pointing out how such cities as New York or other cities where the primary activities are especially influenced by rajas and tamas, where there is heavy competition, where everyone is engaged in fruitive activities, where everyone, majority of people, are simply after material pursuit, so-called economic development. Such a situation is where we see, in particular, all kinds of sinful activities, because there's no proper understanding, there's no cultivation of what is meant to be the higher goal or purpose of life. So in our chapter today, Param Bhuya Pravakshyami, Param Bhuya Pravakshyami, I shall now speak to you, Arjuna, this supreme transcendental knowledge, Jnanam Jnanam Uttamam, of all knowledge, the topmost knowledge. So Vedic culture is inviting all of us to live, to have as our primary goal and objective the cultivation of this knowledge, which of course, the beginning of which is found in the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. I wanted to connect also something which I thought initially, should I connect this, because it seems like it's remote. In one sense it is, in one sense it is not. This very important verse, which is of course connected with this chapter also, Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha Jagat Hitaya Krishnaya. Govindaya Namo Namaha. Very important verse whereby, again, this exemplifies the nature of the Vedic culture, gives primary importance to Go Brahmana. It is nice to explain that actually Go Brahmana belong, Go means cows, Brahmana, sages, those who are cultivating transcendental knowledge, the teachers within society, Go Brahmana. Cows and Brahmanas, it is nicely explained, belong to the same family. Why do they belong to the same family? Because both are in the mode of goodness. By nature, within the system of Varna and Asrama, the Brahmanas, by cultivating this knowledge, by the cultivation, regular, daily cultivation of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc., naturally, they become situated, more and more firmly situated, anchored in the mode of goodness. And mode of goodness is also nicely described in the Bhagavatam as having 4 characteristics. One who attains actually the mode of goodness must demonstrate these 4 qualities of sattvam, truthfulness, doya, compassion, tapa, austerity or discipline, and saucham, satyam, doya, tapa, saucham. These are actually nicely described as the basis of dharma. Mode of goodness means manifesting these 4 very much desired qualities. Those in the mode of goodness will develop these qualities, will demonstrate these qualities. They will be peaceful in mind. And this verse we were reading, also very important, by the cultivation of transcendental knowledge. This 4th verse we were reading, Evam prasanamanaso, Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata. Actually, the verse is nicely explaining how it is only when we develop the mode of goodness, only when we come to the mode of goodness and maintain ourselves in the mode of goodness, we can then nicely engage in Bhagavat or activities of bhakti. Evam prasamana manaso Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata, Bhagavat Bhakti, which is, of course, the conclusion which is given in this chapter as well, a verse we will read in a few minutes. And what happens, this is also very important, Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata, when nicely performed, will take us to Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam. Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam means that the Supreme Lord within the heart of all living entities will actually reveal himself, will actually give us transcendental knowledge, will enable us to access transcendental knowledge which is actually there, because by nature living entity is, as we mentioned earlier, situated in Satchit Ananda Vigraha. So I'd like to come to this end of the chapter after making these brief connections, but I believe very important in terms of Gita Nagari, Vedic culture. We can understand that modern society, through increased urbanization based on these 2 lower modes of material nature, unfortunately, urbanization, modernization, mechanization is largely based or connected with the mode of passion and mode of ignorance. And therefore we can see naturally all kinds of negative results that are taking place. We are finding ourselves in most precarious condition all over the world. We are destroying nature, we are destroying our health, we're destroying the whole planet because of not cultivating or not knowing about this knowledge. So therefore the importance to introduce this knowledge, not only in terms of speaking about this knowledge, but also in terms of demonstrating. And this is what, of course, Arjuna was asking at the end of the chapter. What are the symptoms? What are the symptoms of an individual? We can ask in a similar way, what are the symptoms of a society? What are the symptoms of a community where these principles are being followed, where individuals are endeavoring, at least endeavoring, to come to the mode of goodness, are endeavoring to maintain themselves in the mode of goodness, are endeavoring to go even beyond the mode of goodness. So this was also talked about earlier about the various tattvas. So let us I'll just come to the very end right now, which is most important verse as quoted by Srila Prabhupada. This text 26, one who engages in full devotional service and who does not fall down in any circumstance at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. And this last verse, Brahmano hi pratistaham amritasya vyayasya cha shasvatasya cha dharmasya sukha yaikantikasya cha. Dharma, the word dharma comes up, of course, again and again. Translation, and I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness, and which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal. However, yes, we come to that level of Brahman when we study, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, we come to understand, of course, it's already explained in the Bhagavad Gita as well, that there are different levels of transcendental realization. One of the important verses, and possibly I can come to the end of my presentation today by quoting this particular verse, which is most important from the same chapter actually of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Divinity and Divine Service. Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti sabjate. And the translation as follows: learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, first level, Paramatma, second level, and Bhagavan, third level, which is describing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just to summarize briefly, we should know from this chapter in particular that any connection or involvement with the modes of material nature, especially the lower modes of nature, mode of passion and mode of ignorance, will simply keep us entangled and therefore naturally unhappy, distressful in this material world. Therefore, the goal is to endeavor to rise to the mode of goodness, which is, as was described earlier, illuminating, brings one, helps one develop a sense of happiness, and where one can develop knowledge. But beyond the mode of goodness, one should endeavor to come to the mode of pure goodness, beyond, completely beyond the modes of material nature, and that is the level of bhakti. And therefore we find in our Vaishnava literatures one very important book, Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu. Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu, the nectar of devotion. If we want to actually experience real transcendental happiness, as also nicely explained in the Bhagavatam, that is the topmost dharma. Savai pumsam paro dharmo jato bhakti rabhoksaje ahaituki pratihata yagatma suprasidati. All of the necessities of life, both material and spiritual, will be met very easily when one engages in one's param dharma. The param dharma is bhakti. It is also nicely explained how, again, by this process of bhakti, Vasudeve Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha, Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Sayad Ahaitukam. Both, we don't have to endeavor separately to cultivate knowledge. By this wonderful process of bhakti devotion to Lord Krishna, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, then ahaituki, automatically, spontaneously, these two results will come. Vairagya, detachment from this material world, detachments from these modes of material nature, and then jnanam, transcendental knowledge. I would therefore like to bring this to a close. Bhagavad Gita remains, for me, as all of you, most important book which we need to present to the world as not simply a book belonging to a particular sectarian practice. It is a book of knowledge, universal book of knowledge that every leader, every teacher in the world should be reading and should be teaching on a daily basis. Once again, I am very, very thankful to Dr. Gajendra Panda and his team to organize this event. Has required tremendous effort, but I'm sure it is bringing and will bring immense benefits to whoever hears, and the simple sound vibration that is being sung every day by the recitation of these different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita will definitely bring immense auspiciousness to everyone in the world, which is very much needed today. Thank you again very much for your kind attention. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki.
हरे कृष्ण. धन्यवादाः. प्रणामाः. पूज्य भक्ति राघव स्वामी पादानाम् इदम् अद्भुतं प्रवचनम् अमृतारसायनं वयम् एकघण्टापर्यन्तम् अतीव आनन्देन प्राप्तवन्तः. वयम् अतीव उत्फुल्लिताः स्मः. न केवलं गीतायाः तत्त्वम् अपि तु भागवतस्य सारम् अपि अस्माकं समक्षम् अतीव अनुग्रहं कृत्वा दत्तवन्तः. भवतां चरणकमलेषु वयं प्रणाम परम्परां निवेदयामः, अभिनन्दनं कुर्मः, अपि च साधुवादं निवेदयामः. भवद्भिः बहवः अंशाः चर्चिताः. देहिनोऽस्मिन् यथा देहे कौमारं यौवनं जरा तथा देहांतर प्राप्तिर्धीरः तत्र न मुह्यति इति द्वितीय अध्यायस्य अतीव प्रसिद्धं श्लोकम् अपि भवन्तः अस्मरन् अपि च तत्र देहः अपि च देही इति उभयोर्मध्ये कः तात्विकः भेदः भगवतः हार्दः विचारः कः अस्ति इति एतस्मिन् विषये अस्माकं ज्ञानस्य वृद्धिं कृतवन्तः। अन्ते भवद्भिः सत्यं दया तपः शौचम् इत्यपि जीवनस्य किं किम् आवश्यकम् यावत्पर्यन्तम् अस्माकं जीवने सत्यस्य प्रतिष्ठा न भवति तावत्पर्यन्तं प्राप्तं शास्त्रज्ञानं सर्वं निष्फलं भवति। सत्येन सह दया तपः अपि च शौचम् इति अस्माकं या वैदिक परंपरा अस्ति भगवद्गीतायां यस्य वर्णनं दृश्यते एतस्य सर्वस्य विषयस्य उपरि भवद्भिः अति उत्तमरूपेण निर्वचनं मार्गदर्शनं च कृतम्। न केवलं गीताशास्त्रे न केवलं भागवते न केवलं वेदेषु उपनिषत्सु च भवतां गतिः अन्येषु बहुषु अपि शास्त्रेषु विद्यते इति भवतां प्रवचनं श्रुत्वा एव अनुमानः प्रवर्तते। अद्य एतस्मिन् समये भवतां दिव्यं मार्गदर्शनं प्राप्य वयं सर्वे धन्यधन्याः स्मः। अद्य अस्माकं एतस्मिन् चतुर्दशे सत्रे सर्वाधिक संख्या अस्माकं पार्टिसिपेंट्स् अत्र आसन्। भवतां प्रवचनं श्रोतुं सर्वाधिक संख्याः अत्र आसीत्, अतः वयम् इतोपि आनन्दम् अनुभवामः। अद्य अस्माकं यावन्तः अद्य माननीयाः अत्र सन्ति सर्वेपि अभारतीयाः सन्ति। न कोऽपि जनः भारतभूमि समुत्पन्नः। अधिका संदेशं ये दत्तवन्तः ते पूज्याः अजितानंद ब्रह्मचारिणः क्रोएशिया देशस्य वास्तव्याः सन्ति। मूलतः यूरोप खण्डस्थाः सन्ति। भवन्तः पूज्याः भक्तिराघव स्वामी महोदयाः भवन्तः कनाडा देशस्य वास्तव्याः सन्ति। अस्माकं अद्यतन सत्रस्य सत्राध्यक्षाः माननीयाः डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः। तेषां नाम वस्तुतः डॉक्टर क्यार्बिरी रुसिस्की महोदयाः। ते पोलांड देशस्य सन्ति। अपि च अद्य धन्यवादार्पणं कर्तुम् अस्माभिः सह विराजमानाः सन्ति मान्याः नरोत्तम दास महोदयाः। ते स्पेन देशस्य सन्ति, मैड्रिड नगरे। मूलतः भारतीयः न सन्ति, परन्तु तेषां हृदये भारतं वसति। तेषां हृदये वैदिक संस्कारः अस्ति। वैदिक संस्कृतिः तेषां हृदये एव विराजते। तेषां सम्पूर्णं जीवनं वैदिकम् अस्ति, शास्त्रयुक्तम् अस्ति, अपि च गीतामयम् अस्ति। भवतां चतुर्णां विदुषां चरणकमलेषु वयं प्रणाम परंपरां निवेदयामः। अतीव आनन्दम् अनुभवामः। ये केचन जनाः अधुना मम वाणीं शृण्वन्ति ते सर्वे अपि गौरवम् अनुभवन्ति यत् भारतीय संस्कृति परंपरां एते सर्वे अभारतीयाः सन्तः अपि कथम् आनन्देन उत्साहेन दिव्यरूपेण अनुसरन्तः सन्ति। अद्य मूल भारतीयाः जनाः गीतां न जानन्ति, भागवतं न पठन्ति, उपनिषद् इत्युक्ते किम् इति न जानन्ति, वेदानां पठनं कर्तुं ते ग्लानिम् अनुभवन्ति। परन्तु अस्माकं पुरतः पूज्याः परम केवलम् 1 घण्टाभ्यन्तरे स्वकीये स्वल्पे प्रवचने गीतायाः सारं भागवतस्य सारं प्रतिबोधितवन्तः इति वयं गौरवम्, आनन्दम्, उत्साहं, प्रेरणां च अनुभवामः। अतः भवतां दिव्यं दर्शनं कृत्वा वयं धन्याः। भवताम् अमृत सदृशीं वाणीं, गीतामयीं, भागवतमयीं वाणीं प्राप्य वयं सुतरां धन्याः, धन्यभागः इति वयं चिन्तयामः। एल्डी आर्ट्स् कॉलेज पक्षतः अहं भवतां वारं वारं प्रणाम परम्परां निवेदयामि, धन्यवादान् निवेदयामि। भवन्तः अस्मान् अद्य पूनितां कृतवन्तः। अस्माकं एल्डी आर्ट्स् कॉलेज प्रिन्सिपल महोदय डॉक्टर जेनी राठोड महोदय अपि अत्र उपस्थिता अस्ति। सा अपि अतीव उत्फुल्ला, अतीव आनन्दिता अस्ति। भवतां सर्वेषां दर्शनेन वयम् अतीव सौभाग्यम् अनुभवामः। अतः एल्डी आर्ट्स् कॉलेज पक्षतः अहं भवतां चरणकमलेषु प्रणामान् निवेदयामि, धन्यवादान् निवेदयामि, साधुवादं च प्रकटयामि। धन्यवादः परम पूज्यः भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयः। अद्य अस्माकम् एतस्य सत्रस्य सत्राध्यक्षरूपेण पोलाण्ड निवासिनः डॉक्टर क्यार्विर् ऋषिस्की महोदयाः अत्र विराजमानाः सन्ति। अहं कथं वा तेषां परिचयं ददामि। एते तु महान्तः ऋषिकल्पाः। अहं न जानामि पूर्वजन्मनि तैः कीदृशं पुण्यं कृतं, कश्च संकल्पः विहितः, भगवतः चरणारविन्दयोः कीदृशी प्रार्थना कृता आसीत्, परन्तु तेषां हृदये वेदः, शास्त्राणि, उपनिषद्, गीता च विराजमानः सन्ति। वाराणसीं प्रति समागत्य गुरूणां समीपे गुरूणां चरणारविन्दयोः उपविश्य अतीव श्रद्धया भक्त्या च एतैः बहूनि शास्त्राणि अधिगतानि। वेदाः पठिताः, उपनिषदः अधिगताः, गीतायाः सारः प्राप्तः, ब्रह्मसूत्रमपि पठितं। बहुना किम् एतैः भारतीय संगीत शास्त्रस्य अपि सारः अधिगतः। अतः इंडियन म्यूजिक, भारतीय संगीत शास्त्रे अपि डॉक्टर ऋषिस्की महोदयानाम् अति महती रुचिः गतिश्च वर्तते। अत्र एते PhD लेवल पर्यन्तं उपाधिमपि प्राप्तवन्तः। अतः एते डॉक्टरेट कृतवन्तः तत् अन्यस्मिन् शास्त्रे न, परन्तु संस्कृते। सम्प्रति पोलाण्ड देशे एतेषां भ्राता माता अन्ये च परिजनाः निवसन्ति, परन्तु डॉक्टर क्यार्विर् ऋषिस्की महोदयाः अधुना भारतदेशे निवसन्ति। एतेषाम् आध्यात्मिकं नाम डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः। एते तु योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः इति नाम्ना प्रसिद्धाः सन्ति। आनन्दं च अनुभवन्ति यत् यत्र कुत्रचित् गच्छन्ति तत्र संस्कृते एव व्यवहारं कुर्वन्ति। कतिचित् दिवसपूर्वं ते अस्माकं अस्माकं प्रिन्सिपल महोदयैः सह तैः विविधा चर्चा कृता, परन्तु चर्चा समये ते तु संस्कृते एव वार्तालापं कुर्वन्ति। अस्माकं महाविद्यालयस्य इतरे प्राध्यापकाः अतीव आश्चर्यम्, आनन्दं, गर्वं, गौरवं च अनुभूतवन्तः यत् एकः अभारतीयः श्वेताङ्गः कथं सुन्दरं संस्कृतं निरर्गलरूपेण वदति। कारणं भारतदेशे एतादृशी स्थितिः अस्ति यत् संस्कृतज्ञः अपि संस्कृतं न वदन्ति। संस्कृतस्य प्राध्यापकः अपि संस्कृत संभाषणे असमर्थाः सन्ति इति वस्तुस्थितिः अस्ति। परन्तु डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः उत्तमं संस्कृतं वदन्ति, सरलं वदन्ति, मंजुलं संस्कृतं वदन्ति, प्रीतिकरं संस्कृतं वदन्ति, अपि च निर्दुष्टं पाणिनि गुणयुक्तं पाणिनि सूत्र सहितं निर्दुष्टं शास्त्रीयं संस्कृतं वदन्ति। तेषां संस्कृत भाषा श्रवणेन अस्माकं न केवलम् आनन्दः अपि तु प्रेरणा भवति यत् पोलाण्ड देशीयः एकः गौराङ्गः सः संस्कृतं कीदृशं सरलं कीदृशं मनोभावपूर्णं वदति यत् अस्माकं गौरवम् उपजायते। एतेषां जीवनं ऋषिकल्पं जीवनम्। एतेषां वाणी पूर्णतया गीतायाः वाणी, गीतायाः सन्देशयुक्ताः अस्ति। अद्य अस्माकं सर्वेषां सौभाग्यं यत् डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः विविध शास्त्रेषु ये पारंगताः सन्ति, विविधानि शास्त्राणि हृदयङ्गमं कृत्वा ये सारयुक्तं वचनं सर्वदा वदन्ति, तादृशः मितभाषिणः अतीव सरलहृदयाः अतीव विनयिनः अद्य अस्माकम् एतस्याः सभायाः सभाध्यक्षरूपेण विराजन्ते इति अस्माकं सर्वेषां गौरवम्। अतः कारकं कृतवन्तः, अपि च ते उक्तवन्तः यत् भो पण्डा महोदय कृपया मम कृते स्वल्पं समयं ददातु। कारणम् अद्य मान्याः अजितानन्द प्रभु महोदयाः सन्ति, अपि च परमपूज्याः स्वामीवर्याः अपि सन्ति। तेषां कृते अधिक समयदानं करोतु। मम कृते यदि भवान् 5 निमेषपर्यन्तं ददाति तथापि अलम् इति तेषां विनयः, तेषां विवेकबुद्धिः, तेषां स्वार्थं विना एतादृशं कथनं तेषाम् अतीव हृदयस्य औदार्यं दर्शयति, तेषां हृदयस्य विशालतां द्योतं करोति। अतः एतादृशाः सरलहृदयाः विविधशास्त्रेषु पारङ्गताः विनय योगानन्द महोदयः प्रार्थ्यन्ते यत् भवन्तः अत्र सभाध्यक्षरूपेण एतस्य सत्रस्य अध्यक्षरूपेण कृपया अस्मान् अनुगृह्णन्तु। अपि च अर्धघण्टापर्यन्तं भवन्तः कृपया अस्माकं कृते मार्गदर्शनं प्रयच्छन्तु। अपि च वयम् आनन्दम् अनुभवामः यत् तैः उक्तम् अहं तु संस्कृते एव सम्भाषणं करिष्यामि। तेषां प्रीतिः अस्ति संस्कृते वक्तुं, तेषां सामर्थ्यं शक्तिः, परन्तु प्रीतिः अस्ति, प्रेम अस्ति, भगवद्भक्तिः अस्ति। ते अस्माकं विभूतिसदृशाः सन्ति। अतः प्रार्थये कृपया सत्राध्यक्षरूपेण अध्यक्षीय प्रवचनं कृत्वा अस्मान् अनुगृह्णन्तु डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः।
वासुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं, कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं। माननीय डॉक्टर गजेंद्र पांडा महोदयाः, एलडी कॉलेज प्राचार्य महोदया, राठौड़ महोदय, पूज्य भक्ति राघव स्वामी महोदयः, पूज्यः अजितानंद दस ब्रह्मचारी महोदयः, पूज्यः नरोत्तम विलास दास महोदयः एवं अन्ये अत्र अस्मिन् पटले उपस्थिताः श्रोतारः, सर्वेभ्यो नमस्करोमि, सर्वेभ्यो नमो नमः। इदानीं वयं द्विहोरात् अतिसुन्दर व्याख्यानौ श्रुतवन्तः, अतिसुन्दर व्याख्यानौ श्रुतवन्तः। गुणत्रय विभाग योगः इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतायाः 14 अध्यायस्य विषये पूज्यः भक्तिराघवस्वामी महोदयः क्रमशः सम्पूर्णाध्यायस्य एकमेकं श्लोकं गृहीत्वा सम्यक्तया व्याख्यानं कृतवन्तः। अनन्तरं पूज्यः पूर्वम् अजितानन्ददास महोदय कृतवन्तः, अनन्तरं राघवदास महोदय कृतवन्तः सम्यक्तया। अतः तस्मिन् विषये मम तु किमपि वक्तुम् अति आनन्दः आगतः तेषां भाषणं श्रुत्वा, किन्तु मम गीतायाम् अतीव गहन अध्ययनं नास्ति। ते वैष्णवसम्प्रदायस्य अधिकारिणः सन्ति। ते अहोरात्रिं गीताया एवं भगवतः श्रीकृष्णस्य भक्तिं कृत्वा गीतायाः ज्ञानस्य अधिकारिणः सन्ति। अतः यद् तैरुक्तं तत्तु ग्रहणीयमेव, तत्तु अस्माभिः सर्वैः ग्राह्यं। ते सम्प्रदायदीक्षितः। अतः यतोहि एवमस्ति यद् यः अधिकारी अस्ति कस्यचिदपि सम्प्रदायस्य, सः एव साधनम् अपि कुर्वन् तस्य गहना अध्ययनं कर्तुं समर्थः। यः अदीक्षितः अस्ति अस्मिन् सम्प्रदाये, सः एतावत् गहन अध्ययनं कर्तुम् असमर्थः। अतः सर्वदा सर्वेषु सम्प्रदायेषु दीक्षा विधानम् आसीत्, अस्ति च। अहं गीतां किञ्चित् अधीतवान्, अतः अधिकं वक्तुं तस्मिन् विषये न शक्नोमि। यद्यपि बाल्यकाले अस्माकं पितृचरणाः अस्मान् पाठयन्तः आसन्, एकैकं श्लोकं वा श्लोकद्वयं प्रतिदिनं गृहे। तदा अहं 6 वर्षीयः आसं वा 7 वर्षीयः आसम्। किन्तु तदनन्तरम् अध्ययनं मया न कृतं गीतायाः सम्यक्तया। मूलतः एवं पठनं कृतम् उपरि, परन्तु सा व्याख्यानम् अध्ययनं न कृतवान्। अतः तस्मिन् गीताविषये तु न वक्तुं शक्नोमि प्रामाणिकरूपे। मम अग्रजः तु 2, 3, 4, 5 दिवसपूर्वम् उक्तवान्, यतोहि सः अस्मिन् शास्त्रे अधिक गहनम् अध्ययनं करोति, चिन्तनं मननं च करोति। किन्तु एतस्य सम्पूर्णस्य कार्यक्रमस्य विषये यद् गीता बोधः कार्यक्रमः कृतः, तस्मिन् विषये तद् गजेन्द्र पाण्डे महोदयानां विचारः अति उत्तमः। यद् गीता शास्त्रोपरि मन्थनं भवेत्, सम्पूर्णस्य विश्वस्य विद्वांसाः अस्मिन् विषये वदेयुः, तथा च अधिकः समयः भवेत्। अतः प्रतिदिनम् एकस्य अध्यायस्य मन्थनं ज्ञानयज्ञं भवेत्। तद् ते धन्यवादार्हाः, तथा एल्डी कॉलेज परिवारः धन्यवादार्हाः अस्ति यद् एतादृशं दिव्य आयोजनं कृतवन्तः। तथा सम्पूर्ण विश्वात् विभिन्न ज्ञानिनः आहूतवन्तः। तथा किञ्चित् केवलं वदिष्यामि यत् 14 अध्याये गुणत्रय विभागयोगे भगवान् श्रीकृष्णः त्रिगुणानां विषये वदति। परं भूयः प्रवक्ष्यामि ज्ञानानं ज्ञानमुत्तमं यज्ञत्वा मुनयः सर्वे परं सिद्धिमितो गताः। तद्ज्ञानं यस्मात् ज्ञानात् बहवः मुनयः अर्थात् सर्वे मुनयः इति उक्तवान् परमसिद्धिं सिद्धिगताः तद् गुणातीत मार्ग विषये सम्यक्तया तैः भगवत्कृष्णेन उक्तं तथा तस्मिन् मम तु अध्ययनं योगतन्त्रे कृतं तत्रापि त्रिगुणात्मिका त्रिगुणापरा गुणातीत इत्यादयानां सर्वेषां तत्र साधनानां साधन कथं त्रिगुणोपरि साधनमार्गे गन्तव्यं तत् सर्वं अस्माकं शास्त्रेषु योगतन्त्रादि आगमेषु सर्वं वर्णितं परन्तु भगवद्गीतायाम् अतिसंक्षेपेण तथा च स्पष्टतया उक्तम् अतः एतद् अतीव महत्त्वपूर्णम् अस्ति अनन्तरम् एतदपि वक्तुम् इच्छामि यद् तत्र प्रश्नोत्तरम् अपि यदि भवेत् तथा गीतायाः अध्ययने अस्माकं विद्वांसः ये सन्ति तान् प्रति श्रोतारः अपि प्रष्टुं शक्नुयुः यतोहि इदानीं तु भवती सम्यक्तया स्व ज्ञानप्रस्तुतिर्भवति अनन्तरं कदाचित् जिज्ञासो भवति यद् श्रोतॄणां मनसि जिज्ञासो उदेति यद् तत्र विद्वान् किमपि अस्मिन् विषये किमपि स्पष्टं न कृतवान् वा मम मनसि शङ्का जाता अतः सम्यक्तया भवितुं शक्नोति यत् 5 निमेषपर्यन्तं यदि कस्यचित् अपि विद्वांसां कमपि विदुषां प्रति कश्चित् प्रश्नः अस्ति ताम् अध्ययम् अथवा तस्य विदुषाः भाषणविषये किमपि शङ्का स्यात् तदा सः प्रष्टुं शक्नुयुः तद् अति उत्तमं भवेत् इदानीं अहं न संकोचवशात् उक्तवान् यद् अहम् अधिकं वक्तुं न इच्छामि किन्तु अहं परम्परा अधीतान् स्वामिनान् दृष्ट्वा ब्रह्मचारिणान् दृष्ट्वा अहम् आत्मनं बालाम् इव मत्वा इति गजेन्द्रपण्डमहोदय प्रति अहं निवेदनं कृतवान् यद् अहं तु अस्मिन् ज्ञाने बालः अर्थात् अल्पज्ञानी अस्मि अतः तस्मिन् विषये सम्यक्तया अधिकं वक्तुं न समर्थः अस्मि तथा अहं संस्कृतभाषणे भाषणं कर्तुं शक्नोमि किन्तु न अधिकशास्त्रम् अधीतवान् अतः सर्वदा अहं स्वनामानन्तरं शास्त्रे लिखामि आचार्यं कृतवान् तथापि आचार्यत्वं मयि नास्ति इति मन्ये केवलं गजेन्द्रपण्डमहोदयानां विशेषस्नेहकारणात् अहम् अध्यक्षरूपेण अत्र अस्मि वस्तुतः अध्यक्षत्वं मयि नास्ति अहं बालः एव अस्मि अस्मिन् शास्त्रे वारं एतद् वदामि अस्माकं गृहे मम पितरः तु अधिकं जानन्ति गीताशास्त्रं तैरेव अहं किञ्चित् अध्यापित तथा च मम ज्येष्ठभ्राता बहु अधिकं जानाति अतः अहं मन्ये यद् ते ये जानन्ति ते सम्यक् विषये वदन्तु तथा च मम पक्षतः धन्यवादः एल्डी कॉलेज गजेन्द्रपण्डमहोदयः तथा ये विद्वांसाः स्व अमूल्यसमयं दातुम् अत्र अस्मिन् पटले समुपस्थिताः ये श्रोतारः अत्र आगत्य ज्ञानवृद्धिं कृतवन्तः, त्रिगुणानां विषये तथा तेषां प्रभाव विषये ज्ञात्वा अत्र 3 होरापर्यन्तं वा 2-3 होरापर्यन्तम् उपस्थित्य इदानीं पर्यन्तं तिष्ठन्तः सन्ति। अतः तेभ्यो सर्वेभ्यो मम धन्यवादः, भूय भूयो धन्यवादः व्यवहरामि। तथा पुनः प्रार्थयामि गजेन्द्र पांडा महोदयं यत्ते पुनः दर्शनं स्वदर्शनं दत्वा पुनः अस्मान् उपकारयन्तु स्ववचोभिः। धन्यवादः। श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।
नमस्ते, धन्यवादाः श्रीमन्तः डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदय। पोलैंड देशे अपि एकः संस्कृत परिवारः तिष्ठति। सः परिवारः पूर्णतया संस्कृतमयः, संस्कृत संभाषणमयः, शास्त्राध्ययनपरः। अपि च तस्मिन् परिवारे छात्रौ संस्कृते अति उच्चतमां पदवीं प्राप्तवन्तौ एतादृशौ स्तः। अस्माकं कृते गौरवम् अनुभूयते यत् डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयः अपि च डॉक्टर शिवानंद शास्त्री महोदय। डॉक्टर शिवानंद शास्त्री महोदयः मन्ये 5म दिवसे अस्माकं कार्यक्रमे ते सत्राध्यक्षरूपेण अतीव उत्तमं प्रवचनं कृतवन्तः। बहूनां जनानां तेषां प्रवचनेन अतीव आनन्दः, प्रेरणाः, ज्ञानवृद्धिश्च अभवत्। अतः देशेभ्यः विदेशेभ्यः अपि अहं बहून् सन्देशान् प्राप्तवान्। तेषां प्रवचनं श्रुत्वा बहवः जनाः गीता पठने रताः अभवन्। अतः भवतां परिवारः पूर्णरूपेण संस्कृतमयः, परिवारस्य दर्शनेन अस्माकं पुण्यं जायते। अद्य भवन्तः हितं मितं च उत्तमं प्रवचनं कृतवन्तः। सत्राध्यक्षस्य कार्यम् अतीव विनयेन विवेकदृष्ट्या अपि कृतवन्तः। अतः एल् डी आर्ट्स् कालेज् पक्षतः अहं भवतां कृते प्रणामनिवेदनं करोमि, साधुवादं च निवेदयामि। भवद्भिः यः प्रस्तावः कृतः सः प्रस्तावः अतीव उत्तमः अस्ति। डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयानां प्रस्तावः अस्ति यत् गीतायाः प्रवचनसमये यदि कस्यचित् मनसि कश्चन प्रश्नः समुदेति तर्हि तस्य कृते अवसरः प्रदेयः। सः प्रश्नं करोतु, अपि च यः तत्र प्रवचनं करोति सः उत्तरमपि करोतु। अतः एतादृशविचारः आसीत्, परन्तु आभासीयपटले तत् अतीव उत्तमं न भवति। वर्षद्वयतः अहमपि अध्यापकरूपेण आभासीयपटले एव मम छात्रान् पाठयामि। अपि च ते छात्राः युगपत् 10 जनाः प्रश्नान् पृच्छन्ति। कः किं प्रश्नं पृच्छति इति अहं ज्ञातुं न शक्नोमि। कस्य जनस्य प्रश्नस्य उत्तरं मया दातव्यं, कस्य जनस्य उत्तरं मया श्रोतव्यं, कस्य जनस्य उत्तरस्य मया चिन्तनं करणीयम् इति अत्र अहम् अतीव क्लेशम् अनुभवामि। द्वितीयं स्वकीयं पाठम् अहं स्मरामि, अहं क्लेशं तु अनुभवामि एव। अतः प्रश्नोत्तरी माध्यमेन आभासीयपटले इष्टः परिणामः न लभ्यते, परन्तु भवतां प्रस्तावः अतीव उत्तमः। परिप्रश्नेन सेवया इति ज्ञानस्य मार्गः, तद्विद्धि प्रणिपातेन परिप्रश्नेन सेवया अस्माकं परम्परानुसारं त्रयः मार्गाः सन्ति ब्रह्मज्ञानस्य अधिगमनार्थं त्रयः मार्गाः सन्ति तद्विद्धि प्रणिपातेन परिप्रश्नेन सेवया विनययुक्तः विद्यार्थी स्यात् परिप्रश्नं कुर्यात् अपि च गुरुसेवया सः रतः स्यात् अतः एतैः त्रिभिः चरणैः सोपानैः सः आत्मतत्त्वं विशिष्टं तत्त्वम् अधिगमिष्यति इत्यत्र नास्ति सन्देहः इति अस्माकं परम्परा अस्ति एव भवन्तः अनया परम्परया एव काशी नगर्यां विद्याभ्यासं कृतवन्तः दिव्यं ज्ञानं च प्राप्तवन्तः अहं भवतां प्रस्तावस्य समर्थनं करोमि परन्तु आभासीय पटले सः प्रस्तावः पूर्णरूपेण फलप्रसूः न भवति परन्तु मम मनसि एषः विचारः अस्ति अग्रे कदाचित् एतादृशः कश्चन समावेशः भविष्यति यत्र उत्तमाः प्रश्नाः अपि प्रक्ष्यन्ते अपि च तदनुसारं यः अस्माकं विद्वान् आगमिष्यति सः प्रश्नस्य उत्तरं समाधानं च शास्त्रीयरूपेण प्रदास्यति अतः भो डॉक्टर योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयः भवतां प्रस्तावस्य कृते अपि अहं धन्यवादान् निवेदयामि अद्य अस्माकम् एतस्य सत्रस्य त्रयः महान्तः विद्वांसः अस्माकम् उपरि सविशेषरूपेण अनुग्रहं कृतवन्तः इति अहं कथयामि गुणत्रय विभाग योगः अतीव गंभीरः अस्ति त्रयाणां गुणानां किं स्वरूपं कथं परिणामः कथम् एकस्य अन्यस्य उपरि प्रभावः न केवलं प्रेरणाप्रदः अपितु अतीव ज्ञानगम्यः एतस्मिन् गंभीरे विचारे अतीव तलस्पर्शि चिन्तनपूर्वकम् अस्माकं ब्रह्मचारिणः अजितानंद दास महोदयाः अपि च परमपूज्याः स्वामीवर्याः भक्ति राघव स्वामी अपि च योगानंद शास्त्री महोदयाः अपि उत्तमरूपेण तस्य समुद्रमन्थनं कृत्वा साररूपेण अमृतं दत्तवन्तः अतः एल्डी आर्ट्स कॉलेज पक्षतः अहं भवतां सर्वेषां कृते धन्यवाद राशिं निवेदयामि प्रणामान् च निवेदयामि गो भवन्तः सर्वे महान्तः विद्वांसः भवन्तः खलु अस्माकं विश्वस्य रत्नसदृशाः सन्ति भवताम् एतादृशानां ऋषिकल्पानां ज्ञानघनानां चरणकमलेषु प्रणामान् कृत्वा वयम् आनन्दं गौरवं च अनुभवामः अतः एल्डी आर्ट्स कॉलेज पक्षतः अहं भवतां सर्वेषां कृते साधुवादं निवेदयामि सम्प्रति अस्माकम् एल्डी आर्ट्स कॉलेज प्रिंसिपल महोदयाः डॉक्टर जेनी राठौड़ महोदयाः अत्र उपस्थिताः सन्ति तासाम् इच्छा अस्ति यत् अद्य अस्माकं यत् सत्रं तत् सत्रम् अतीव समीचीनं गौरवपूर्णम् अधिकसंख्यायुक्तमपि अभवत् अतः अस्माकं अहमदाबाद एजुकेशन सोसाइटी डायरेक्टर महोदयः श्रीमन्तः बीएम शाह महोदयः अपि अतीव गौरवम् अनुभवन्ति आनन्दं च अनुभवन्ति एतद्द्वारा सम्प्रति अहं प्रिंसिपल महोदयाः निवेदयामि यत् ताः अपि एतस्मिन् सन्दर्भे किञ्चित् सन्दर्भान्वितं किञ्चित् वक्तव्यं कुर्वन्तु इति डॉक्टर जेनी राठौड़ प्रिंसिपल एल्डी आर्ट्स कॉलेज अहमदाबाद
Namaste. Today's session was seriously very enlightening, and we are very proud and honored to have three speakers with us who were actually, who represent three different nations. One is from Croatia, one is from Canada, British Columbia, and the third one is, last but not the least, from Warsaw, Poland. I think it only goes to prove that the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, is a universal text. It rises above the barriers of language, race, culture, religion, It has a universal message to preach. I believe, Dr. Panda, I'm too small an individual to be able to throw any light on the Bhagavad Gita because I'm neither a Sanskrit scholar nor an expert on the Gita. And yet, I do remember I shared this verse with you just a while ago while the second discourse was going on. This was my favorite verse from the second chapter, and I thought I should read it out. This was my favorite chapter, and we had to actually, I remember, in the 9th standard, as soon as we would enter the Sanskrit class, our Sanskrit teacher used to actually make us recite this entire chapter. My favorite verse, I think I would like to recite it. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. Sammohat smriti vibrama. Smriti Brahmshat Buddhi Nasho, Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. And I remember how we used to recite this particular chapter. I think it begins by describing the qualities of a Sthita Pragya. Sthita Pragya se kya bhasha. I still remember the first line. Translated in English, it means, well, from anger, illusion is born. Illusion leads to bewilderment, which leads to the destruction of the intellect. When the intellect is destroyed, then logic is impaired. When logic is ravaged, then the downfall of the individual takes place. I still remember this verse all these years later. Such is the depth of meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. Yes, I would also like to mention that our director of the Ahmedabad Education Society, Shri B.M. Shah, was very impressed when I told him that there are 89 people present when we started today's session. And he says, that's an incredible achievement. So it is indeed an incredible achievement because of your contribution. Thank you very much for this enlightening session today. Thank you, Panda sir. I just thought I would share this little bit of information with you about my favorite verse from the second chapter. Thank you so much.
धन्यवादाः आचार्य महोदय। डॉक्टर जेनी राठोड महोदयानं सर्वदा अस्माकं कृते बलप्रदानं प्रेरणाप्रदानं च भवति। अतः एतस्य अन्तर्गन्ध एव गीतां प्रति तासां भक्तिः, गौरवभावना, प्रेमभावना च अदृश्यते। सर्वदा 14 दिवसेभ्यः अस्माभिः सह अत्र वर्तन्ते। सर्वेषां विदुषां प्रवचनानि शृण्वन्ति, आनन्देन च तद्विषये चिन्तनं मननं कुर्वन्ति। अद्य तासां मुखतः प्रथमवारम् अहं संस्कृतश्लोकं श्रुतवान्। She is the head of the Department of English in LDR's college and she has done her PhD in English. पिछले 18 साल से मैंने पहली बार उनके मुख से अत्यंत सुंदर एक गीता का श्लोक संस्कृत में सुना और अत्यंत प्रीतिपूर्वक मैं मानता हूं कि ये जो 14 दिन तक ये जो कार्यक्रम चला उसका ये प्रभाव पड़ा कि वो खुद गीता में अभी तलस्पर्शी अध्ययन करने के लिए लग गई हैं और उन्होंने आज गीता का एक श्लोक भी आपके सम्मुख रखा। न केवल संस्कृत के गीता के श्लोक उन्होंने रखा, लेकिन मैंने परिलक्षित किया है कि उनके जीवन में बहुत कुछ परिवर्तन इन्हीं 14 दिन के अंदर, 2 सप्ताह के अंदर आया। मैंने आप लोगों को पहले बताया था कि थोड़े दिन पहले ही, 20 दिन पहले, उनकी माता जी का स्वर्गवास हुआ और माता जी के स्वर्गवास के बाद पुत्र अथवा पुत्री की मनस्थिति कैसी होती है ये सिर्फ अनुभवजन्य बात है। लेकिन उस दुखद परिस्थिति में भी हमारे प्रिंसिपल जी ने अपना मनस्थैर्य बनाए रखा। दूसरे दिन से भी कॉलेज का जो भी कामकाज था उन्होंने किया और गीता सत्र के लिए कार्यनिष्ठा देती रही। एक दिन भी उन्होंने छुट्टी नहीं ली, लेकिन वो कर्म तत्पर रही। गीता का कर्मयोग उन्होंने अपने जीवन में जी करके दिखाया। ये परिवर्तन हुआ है और मैंने उसके बाद कभी उनके मुखमंडल के ऊपर दुख की लकीर भी नहीं देखती। वो हमेशा खुश रहती है, आनंदित रहती है, और मन में उनके ये विचार है कि मेरी माता की सद्गति के लिए प्रभु के चरणारविंद में उनको स्थान मिले। इसीलिए ये गीता का उपक्रम भी शुरू हो गया है। 18 दिन तक हमारा चिंतन, मनन और निधिध्यासन चलता रहेगा। 18 देश के लोग इस कार्यक्रम से जुड़े हुए हैं और हमेशा उनका मार्गदर्शन, उनका आशीर्वाद और कोई ना कोई प्रस्ताव मुझे मिलते ही रहते हैं। इतना सुंदर कार्यक्रम जो एलडीआर कॉलेज की तरफ से हो रहा है, उसमें डॉक्टर जेनी राठौड़ जी और मुझे प्राप्त हो, इसलिए ये कार्य संभव हो गया। अद्य अस्माकं धन्यवाद समर्पणं कर्तुं स्पेन निवासी मैड्रिड नगरे ये निवसन्ति तादृशाः अत्र नरोत्तमदास महोदयाः उपस्थिताः सन्ति। यद्यपि तेषां जन्म मैड्रिड नगरे अभवत्, तेषां मातृभाषा स्पेनिश अस्ति, परन्तु ते तु तेषां हृदयं वैदिकं वर्तते, भारतीयं वर्तते, गीतामयं वर्तते। तेषां पूर्वदर्शनम् अहं मायापुर गुरुकुले कृतवान्। तत्र गुरुकुले 14 दिवसपर्यन्तं स्थित्वा अहं तान् छात्रान् संस्कृत व्याकरणं, संस्कृते सम्भाषणम् अपि च गीतायाः 12 अध्यायं पाठयामि स्म। 14 दिवसपर्यन्तं मम भोजन व्यवस्था नरोत्तमदास महोदयेन कृता अभवत्। यदा यदा अहम् अल्पाहारार्थं गच्छामि तदा मम सेवायां ते रताः आसन्। अतः अहं मम जीवने कदाचिदपि तेषां सेवां न विस्मरिष्यामि। अधुना श्रीमन्तः नरोत्तमदास महोदयाः अतीव विनयिनः, विविधेषु शास्त्रेषु रताः, गीता चिन्तन तत्पराः, मैड्रिड नगरे एकं गुरुकुलं चालयन्ति। तस्मिन् गुरुकुले स्पेनिश जनाः आगच्छन्ति, गीतां पठन्ति, वैदिकं जीवनं जीवन्ति। 2 मासपूर्वम् एतैः आमन्त्रणः अस्माकं मैड्रिड नगरम् आगच्छन्तु। गुरुकुले ये छात्राः पठन्ति तान् संस्कृत सम्भाषणं शिक्षयन्ति। एतेषां सहृदयानाम् आमन्त्रणम् अतीव आनन्दकरं मम आसीत्। अग्रे यदा भगवान् मम कृते समय अवकाशं प्रदास्यति तदा अहम् अवश्यं मैड्रिड नगरं गमिष्यामि। भवतां गुरुकुलस्य विद्यार्थिनः अहं संस्कृत सम्भाषणं शिक्षयिष्यामि। अद्य अस्माकं धन्यवाद समर्पणं कर्तुं सर्वेषां विदुषां कृते आभार प्रदर्शनं कर्तुम् अहं प्रार्थये। श्रीमन्तः नरोत्तमदास महोदयाः, मैड्रिड, स्पेन।
Hare Krishna, Pranam. Thank you very much, first of all, to Rajendra Panda Mahodaya for having gathered us all here to discuss this Bhagavad Gita Katha in the midst of great scholars like Jitana Prabhu, Bhakti Raghava Swami, and Dr. Yogandananda Shastri Mahodaya. We've had a wonderful session hearing from these renowned scholars about the Chaturdasha Dhyaya, the Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, and we thank them as well. We thank them for having explained very nicely how Sri Krishna instructed Arjuna in this science of the Three Gunas. No, Sri Bhagavan Vacha Parambuya Prayakshami Yananam Uttamam. We have been hearing how the Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord, he again explained Param, this Parambhuya Pravakshanti, this transcendental knowledge. And we have been hearing, how Bhagavan Shri Krishna is the Bija Pradapita, and the source of all these, the seed-giving father. He's the one who impregnates the Prakriti, the material nature, and the Lord, has impregnated, as a Pradapita. Then we have been hearing Sarvayo Nishukanteya Murtiya Sambhavantya Tasam Brahma Mahadyonir Aham Bija Pradapita. Krishna is the Purushottama, as Jitanandana Mahodaya was explaining. Purushottama, he's the self-satisfied Atmaram. And when in contrast, we have been seeing the Prakriti Purusha, the materialist, who are not self-satisfied in themselves. The Pradapita is self-satisfied, Atmarama. All these topics, we've been hearing, and it's been a great pleasure to hear, that the Lord instructs in the Three Gunas. The first one, manifestation of the mode of goodness, we can perceive, can be experienced. One of the gates of the body, they are illuminated by knowledge. Then we have when there is an increase of passion, then the symptoms of great attachment, creative activity, intense endeavor, and uncontrollable desires and hankering develop. And when there is an increase in the mode of ignorance, then darkness and inertia, madness, illusion is manifest. In this way, these great scholars have been explaining all these topics, and we can again remember these important instructions. As we can also perceive, how in today's, nowadays, there's many madness, illusion, and see all these qualities which come from ignorance. And it's very, very nice to have been hearing from them what is, as we will see, we have been seeing the solution, how to overcome all these modes. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has given the symptoms, how to be able to identify these modes. So then we have the attachment and delusion, which are present. He who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear, who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active, who is situated in the self and regards all happiness and distress, who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with equal eye. So here we see all the symptoms of one who is transcendental to these modes. Seeing a piece of gold and stone with the same vision. All this great knowledge we have been hearing from these great scholars, and we are very thankful. Because now we can have a better understanding how to transcend all these three modes. And then, as it was being explained, one who engages in full devotional service and failing in all circumstances at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to a level of Brahman. So now we have, a clear vision of this chapter, nicely explained by our three renowned scholars in today's session. And we are very thankful and it's been a very great pleasure to hear from them and to be in the association of all of you. And we hope that we'll have more opportunities in the future to keep on discussing these wonderful topics. And once again, thank you very much to Gajendra Panda Mahodaya, who I appreciate deeply in my heart. And he has taught me so many wonderful lessons there in Mayapur, in the Gurukul. And yeah, with that feeling of gratefulness, and I have, started this little Gurukul here, as he was explaining, trying to teach these same instructions of the Gita. And in this way, the teachings of the Gita can be preached all over the world. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
हरे कृष्ण धन्यवादः श्रीमन्तः नरोत्तमदास महोदयः अद्य धन्यवादार्पण समये भवद्भिः अपि गीता ज्ञानं गीता सारः अस्माकं 14 अध्यायस्य प्रदत्तः अतः भवतां कृते विशेषरूपेण वयमपि धन्यवादान् वितरामः। हमारे इस 18 दिन तक जो महान यज्ञ चल रहा है उसका आज 14 दिवस पूर्ण हो रहा है। गुणत्रय विभाग योग पूर्ण हुआ। कल 15 अध्याय के ऊपर चिंतन मनन होगा। 15 अध्याय जिसे हम पुरुषोत्तम योग कहते हैं, जो गीता का मस्तिष्क है। अगर 12 अध्याय गीता का हृदय है तो 15 अध्याय पुरुषोत्तम योग वो गीता का मस्तिष्क है, समस्त ज्ञान का भंडार है पुरुषोत्तम योग। कल उस योग के ऊपर चिंतन मनन करने के लिए 3 महान विद्वान हमारे साथ उपस्थित रहेंगे। पुरुषोत्तम योग के ऊपर कुंती का संभाषण करने के लिए कलकत्ता से डॉक्टर बुद्धेश्वर षडंगी जी हमारे साथ रहेंगे, जो एक महान कवि हैं, गवेषक हैं और अलंकार शास्त्र में जिनकी अत्यंत अद्भुत गति है। और हम जैसे गद्यमय वार्तालाप करते हैं वो पद्य में भी ऐसे वार्तालाप कर सकते हैं। ऐसे महान व्यक्तित्व के धनी डॉक्टर बुद्धेश्वर षडंगी जी कलकत्ता से हमारे साथ विद्यमान रहेंगे। पुरुषोत्तम योग जैसे अत्यंत कठोर, अत्यंत कठिन और तर्क साध्य ऐसे महान अध्याय के ऊपर माननीय वक्ता के नाते कल हमारे साथ रहेंगे साधु श्रुति प्रकाश दास, जो गांधीनगर अक्षरधाम में आर्ट्स के डायरेक्टर हैं, पीएचडी हैं, डिलीट हैं और अनेक शास्त्रों के रचयिता हैं और पूज्य प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज के अत्यंत प्रिय शिष्य रहे। और ऐसे महान व्यक्तित्व के धनी कल पुरुषोत्तम योग के ऊपर निर्वचन करेंगे। और कल इस सत्र के कल 15 अध्याय के सत्राध्यक्ष के नाते जगन्नाथपुरी से हमारे साथ रहेंगे डॉक्टर प्रभात रंजन महापात्र, जो अद्वैत वेदांत के एक तलस्पर्शी विद्वान के नाते जाने माने विद्वान हैं। देश में और परदेश में जिनकी ख्याति है और जो सिर्फ वेदांत पढ़े नहीं लेकिन वेदांतमय जीवन जीते हैं, अद्वैतमय जीवन जीते हैं। बहुमुखी प्रतिभा के धनी डॉक्टर प्रभात रंजन महापात्र जी हमारे साथ रहेंगे सत्राध्यक्ष के नाते। तो आप लोग जितने अभी यहाँ पर मेरा यह वचन सुन रहे हैं, मैं सबसे करबद्ध निवेदन करता हूँ कि श्रीमद् भगवद गीता का मस्तिष्क समान और अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण अध्याय पुरुषोत्तम योग का भी कल आप जरूर श्रवण सुख प्राप्त करिए, ज्ञान प्राप्त करिए। आज हम यहीं पर इस मनोरम सायंकाल में आज गुणत्रय विभागीय योग को हम समाप्त करते हुए इस अध्याय के साथ जुड़े हुए समस्त विद्वान और समस्त सुधी वृंद को प्रणाम करते हुए आज यहीं पर ये कार्यक्रम हम समाप्त करने जा रहे हैं। आइए सब मिलकर के शांति पाठ करेंगे और इस कार्यक्रम को यहीं समाप्त करेंगे। सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ओम शांति शांति शांति। नमस्ते। हम कल प्राप्त करेंगे ठीक 5 बजे हम लोग सभी लगिन हो जाएंगे। नमस्ते, कल मिलेंगे।